Welcome to the Queen City Music Podcast, the podcast devoted to the local music scene in Charlotte, North Carolina. Now, here's your host, Matthew Adlin.
Hello and welcome to episode 47 of the Queen City Music Podcast. This episode of the Queen City Music Podcast is sponsored by Middle Sea Jazz, Charlotte's premier jazz club located at 300 South Brevard Street in Uptown Charlotte. Stop in for Thursday night jazz jams, gospel Sundays every third Sunday of the month, or bi-weekly Wednesdays for Remember Wednesdays. But if you prefer, stay in for the evening and watch their Saturday night live stream, where you'll have access to the best performances Middle Sea Jazz has to offer. And if you want the VIP treatment, get a Baby Grand membership, where life takes you to a higher note. Tickets are now available for Jazz's Fish on August 6th, Jazz's Disney on August 13th, and make sure to visit middleseajazz.com for a complete list of events. This month, I'm speaking with Chris Garges from Old House Studio. If you haven't heard of Chris, he's a Charlotte native who's been entrenched in the local music scene since he was young. He's a trained percussionist as well as walking the line as an audio engineer and producer at Old House Studio. Chris Garges, thank you for coming on the podcast today, man. It's so good to see you.
Thanks for having me here, Matthew. I'm really looking forward to this.
So, you are the first person I've had on the podcast in person in almost a year. I feel fantastic. It's so good to have somebody in the studio with me right now.
Yay, vaccinations.
So, Chris, are you originally from the Charlotte area?
I am. I'm one of the few. I know most people on your podcast are from New York and then moved down here.
Yeah. So, original Charlottean. That doesn't happen that much these days.
Yeah. Born at Presbyterian Hospital and grew up kind of over like in the Freedom Park area.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, can you tell me about your music background?
Yeah. I guess like I've always been a music fan. Like my parents were both music fans, and my mom played piano and sang, and they listened to records around the house like a lot.
Right.
And so I sort of dug the stuff they were listening to, which they were kind of folkies, you know. Mm-hmm. Like my dad loved the Kingston Trio, and but they listened to a lot of like people who came out of the Brill Building songwriting stuff. So like my mom dug Neil Diamond and Barry Manilow, and
great.
My dad was a big Crosby, Stills and Nash fan. So I listened to a lot of stuff that was kind of vocal and songwriter oriented.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, so then, when they came around in fifth grade to say, or I guess the end of fourth grade to say, you can be in band in fifth grade. Do you want to play an instrument? I really wanted to play the bassoon. This is a totally dumb story, but,
I love dumb stories.
You'll get several of them. I really wanted to play the bassoon, because of, and you'll appreciate this, I think. I really wanted to play the bassoon because, I thought that the kind of bassoon looking instrument, that the guy in the Cantina band in Star Wars had was really cool looking.
Oh, I love it.
And I did love the way bassoon sounded, but they said, well, bassoons are a double reed instrument, which is really difficult to play. So you should start on saxophone or clarinet. And then like, Men at Work had a saxophone player. So I was like, saxophone, and I'll do that. So I played saxophone in school band in fifth grade, but around that time too, like I saw like a video of the Police and saw Stuart Copeland playing, and it was like, man, that looks cool. So I got interested in drums. And so I got to junior high and which was in sixth grade. Really became obsessed with drums and started watching all these like music videos and stuff and watching the drummer and sort of learned like what the right hand does and what the left hand does and everything. And I did the classic thing of setting up a bunch of buckets like a drum kit in the house and playing all that kind, and just sort of kept harassing my parents about getting a drum kit.
Yeah.
But I was still playing saxophone in the school band. And so, my grandparents finally took me to a bunch of pawn shops on my 12th birthday. And we found this gigantic 11-piece CB700 drum kit. That was my kit for a few years. And, but at the same time I had this great band director who at Piedmont Middle School, whose name was Bob Reed, and he lives up in Maggie Valley now, and he's a friend of mine thanks to the wonders of modern social media and stuff. But he was really terrific. He said, we've got too many drummers and we don't have enough saxophone players, so I can't let you switch. But he would make me these cassettes of like Yes and the Dixie Dregs and stuff, and be like, man, you should listen to these drummers. And so I learned a lot of really, like, I got exposed to a lot of really great drummers through Bob, who was wonderful. And And then, then again, my parents being sort of big music fans and supporters, were like, well, you should take some, if you're going to do this, you should take some lessons. So I had also started taking piano lessons around this time.
So this is in middle school?
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. We inherited a piano actually. I had, and had a piano in our house. So my mom had to start taking piano lessons with, Mark Tysinger, who was the pianist in the Charlotte Symphony at the time. And then as I was getting interested in drums, we were looking for a teacher. And so Mark suggested that we contact Carol Stumpf, who was the timpanist in the Charlotte Symphony at the time.
Okay.
And I studied with Carol all up into college. And she's also still a friend and a very important mentor to me. Like I learned so much from her, not just about classical percussion, but about music and just all kinds of life stuff. She was a really great still is a really great life coach to me. Mm-hmm. So I studied classical percussion, but I was like putting together rock bands with friends, and I was starting to listen to jazz by high school. And I played in the Youth Symphony, the Charlotte Youth Symphony, for a few years. And then when I was in high school, I was in this rock band called Relayer. Mm-hmm. Bruce Hazel, who's in Temperance League.
Is that after the Yes album?
Yes, we were named. The band was named after the Yes album, although we never played any songs off that album. Weirdly enough,
fine.
But we had a couple of guys in the band who were sort of prog guys, and then the lead singer was this guy Bruce Hazel, who's around Charlotte. He fronts the band Temperance League, which is one of my favorite bands in town. Mm-hmm. And Justin Faircloth, who was in the Houston Brothers and Ancient Cities, he was the keyboard player in that band, and we played a lot of gigs around town, like at the 4808 Club and some places like that. But we decided we wanted to make a recording. And so, our bass player had a teacher named Tim Smith, who was Arthur Smith's nephew, actually. And he got us to record at J. Howard Production Audio.
Okay.
And Tim sort of kind of produced our little cassette that we did. And, so I got doing that recording session, like I got really sort of fascinated by the studio and into recording. And David Floyd, the engineer, was a really wonderful engineer. And I asked a lot of questions and he gave me a lot of really cool answers. So I started getting fascinated with that, started like borrowing Tascam 4 tracks from friends of mine and recording some other bands that I knew.
Around what time was this?
This would have been like 1989, so I would have been, a junior in high school. It would have been like sort of, around the time I was a junior in high school.
See, I know I had friends who were getting into recording at that time, doing their own stuff, and they were doing, they were getting 4 tracks and things like that. And I kicked myself in the butt. I mean, maybe that's something I should have did at a younger age, but I guess writing my own stuff didn't get to me until, years and years later. So. Yeah,
I don't, some people just sort of get interested in it, and it's weird. Like I was interested in it in this peripheral way. Like I didn't immediately like save up my money and run out and buy a 4-track.
Right.
But I was kind of always borrowing them from a couple friends and recording friends and stuff like that. But I never thought that it would really be like a career path for me. Mm-hmm. I really wanted to just play drums for a living. And so I wound up going to school at the University of Miami down in Coral Gables, Florida.
Okay.
Because they had a really great, and still do have a really great modern music program. Like I didn't want to go to a college and just study classical and then audition for an orchestra or something like that.
Modern music being.
Well, they had, like at the time, they had a degree, like you could get a degree in studio music and jazz.
Gotcha.
That's what my degree is. And so my primary instrument in college was drum set.
Yeah.
I mean, I took a semester of snare drum and a semester of mallets and a semester of timpani, and I studied hand percussion. Like I got really into playing congas and djembe and stuff down in Miami, but I mean, drum set was like my primary. So I mean, in a way, like I have a degree in drum set with studio music and jazz.
Yeah.
And that's what I wanted to do and they were one of the few schools at the time that offered that. And it was like, it's like a university. It's a private university like Duke or something. So it's accredited. It's it's not like a trade school or whatever. And that, and I think it was important to my parents that I get a college degree as was the thing at the time.
Sure.
So, and I loved it. It was great. I had a great experience. Like I learned so much down there that I wouldn't have learned if I had just stuck around here. I would have learned different things if I'd stuck around here, but I was exposed to a lot of great things and I met a lot of really wonderful people who are still my friends all over the country and all over the world, really.
Right.
But one extra cool thing about Miami was they were also either the first or second university to offer a degree in recording. They had a music engineering program. And so because I was sort of peripherally interested in that, I spent a lot of time hanging out with music engineering majors and spent a lot of time in the studios down there. Like I would sort of work out these deals, like the recording engineers could sign up for studio time at night, from like 10 p.m. to 8 a.m. or something like that. And a lot of them would sign up. The real go-getters would sign up for time, even if they didn't have anything to do. So a lot of them, their time would come up and they would say like, oh, I've got this session tonight, but I don't have anything to do. And I would volunteer to haul my drums over to the studio and set them up and play. And they could kind of practice drums, getting drum sounds and stuff, if they would sort of tell me some of what they were doing.
So at this time, you're probably talking about like what, early 90s, mid 90s?
Yeah, I was in school from 91 to 95. And, and in 94, I sort of lucked my way into a gig with a band that was playing sort of top 40 R&B funk on Miami Beach, like 5 or 6 nights a week. And I did that all the way through the time. I switched bands in 95, but was in a similar band that was, again, playing 5 or 6 nights a week.
Sure. All
over South Florida while I was going to college.
Well, I'm thinking about the time frame, because I was in school at the time, in graduate school in Cleveland. And like you, moving away, I was in New York and I moved to Cleveland. And you think, what, why would you move from New York to Cleveland? Because I wanted to get out of New York at that time. But
sure.
Anyway, had a whole bunch of experiences, met a lot of people. But my point being is that I think at that time, a recording was just tape at that time. And I remember a little later, a couple of years later, maybe the later 90s, is when digital recording started to pop up, because I had something called Cakewalk.
Oh, sure.
It was like one of the first things, I had tried to get into it, and I got so frustrated after spending the money. I was just like, I'm not going to do anything with this. It's ridiculous, So that was your experience start in the studio at that time when you were, kind of picking up stuff, all tape, or were you starting to get into digital at that time?
Well, the studio at University of Miami was a tape based. They had a 2-inch MCI machine, and in the studios that I had been, I hung around a lot of studios in Charlotte when I was a kid too, because by the time I was in high school, I'd gotten to be friends with a lot of the session players around town.
Yeah.
So it was kind of normal for me to sort of get done with school and then go over to Studio East or J. Howard Production Audio or Lamont or whatever, and just sort of hang out for a couple hours before I had to go home and watch sessions. And again, at the time in high school, it was for me, it was more about sort of watching musically what was going on, but I would still be interested in everybody's using Sennheiser 421s on the toms. That must be a thing, So I was picking up little bits of information, but all those would have been tape-based studios, although people were starting to mix to DAT tape kind of around then. Mm-hmm. And then I guess it was when I was in college, maybe that Alesis came out with the ADATs, which were it was affordable digital recording in 8-track increments, because if you wanted 24 tracks, you bought 3 machines and synced them up. But I had a couple friends in Miami who were sort of well off, who had some money, who bought an ADAT or 2,
Okay.
And, so I do remember my senior recital, we recorded to ADAT, and I think just one, it was like an 8-track recording maybe. And we went over to my friend's house and mixed it, and all this kind of stuff. So that was starting to pop up, cause digital recording was getting a little more affordable. But I do remember the first time I ever did, a completely computer session, I think, was I guess around 98 maybe.
Okay.
I had a friend, a really great guitar player, bass player, singer named David Foster, not the famous producer David Foster, but this guy, he was from Austin and he lived here and was getting ready to move to Spain for a year and then moved back to Austin. But he got set up going in his house that I think may have been Cakewalk actually.
Okay.
And I remember, before he left, I went over and I played drums on a bunch of these songs, and then he was going to take all that stuff with him to Spain and sort of finish the stuff over there. But I remember working on that stuff and playing. I think he put down a scratch guitar to a click track or something, and then I played the drums. And I remember playing and being like, God, I'm playing really far behind the beat. Like, and I tend to sort of sit the backbeat a little behind, but it was like, this is really weird. So I remember really trying to play super edgy, you know, and then we would listen back to it and it would still be behind. I was like, man, what's going on with my playing? This is really weird. So I tried to play everything like super edgy, and then went back and I did some percussion overdubs on stuff. And that was really difficult. It's like I had to play everything really on top. And I was just thinking, man, what's wrong? You know, I was really apologetic. And then like 6 months go by or something like that. Or maybe it was like a year, maybe it was after David moved back to Austin, but I remember him telling me like, man, I figured out what was going on with that session. And, you know, there's this thing called latency, which neither one of us knew about, you know, I mean, I didn't, and at the time, even when he was explaining it to me, I didn't know about it, you know, cause I'm such a Luddite. I was way far behind on the computer recording stuff for years, but he was explaining latency to me and I was like, well, that sucks. Like what's, you know, another strike against computers. Yeah. So, and again, I said that was like 98, maybe 99 when that happened.
So when did you start to make the switch into studio work? And I guess the next question is, if you're a trained musician with an amazing pedigree, background, do you have that same similar background for recording? Did you go to recording school, or is everything that you learn from hands-on doing it yourself?
No, it's pretty much all like kind of hands-on stuff with the exception of the fact that I went to a college that had a great recording program and I just sort of hung out and absorbed a bunch of that stuff. Yeah. But I didn't really take classes in recording down there, you know? I mean, part of it was that the recording program down there is so intense that like, it's basically, I'm assuming it's the same way, but it was like an EE degree, like an electrical engineering degree where you had to play an instrument also and you got access to the studios. So like day one, they teach you how to solder, for instance, you know? Yeah. And, but you also, in order to get into that program down there at the time, you had to have taken calculus. And, I am not a math person at all. I married a math teacher, which is kind of hysterical in a lot of ways, but yeah, I am so not a math
Sorry, that doesn't make you a math teacher.
Oh, no, not me at all. No, I will still to this day, I, you know, if she starts talking about things she's teaching, like I love her to death, but like just because it's math stuff, like she'll call me out. She'll be like, I can see you're starting to glaze over right now, you know? But yeah, like a lot of it was just sort of paying attention and like, but I was so fascinated by studios, and like one thing that was great about that little cassette that my high school band did was like we worked on it. We probably did 5 or 6 days, like weekend days in the studio or whatever. And like when it was done, we had this thing that like we could listen to over and over again, and we could play it for people.
You had a product.
Yeah, exactly. You know, it was like there was a tangible thing that was, you know, with a gig, you play it and it's like if the gig's great, you have these great memories, and you know, but it's gone unless you record it, you know, unless it's documented. So if you know, to me, like having this recording was awesome. And so I was fascinated by that. So anytime anybody asked me about doing a recording session, like playing on a session, I was always like, yes, it didn't matter.
Hold on. So what brought you back to Charlotte?
Well, it's that
just finishing school. Cause I mean, if you're doing well in Florida and you're gigging and you're playing, now you're coming back. And I don't want to say you don't have anything here, but you know, you already have a network of playing down there.
Well, that's a good question. But that's part of the reason why I did. That is the reason why I did stay in Miami for a year. Okay. It was like I graduated. I'm playing music for a living. That's what I want to do. That's what my degree's about. So why leave, you know? So I stayed in Miami for a year, and the music scene in Miami is weird. It's like I've just noticed, just through staying in touch with friends of mine since I've graduated, that the scene it's kind of cyclical. Like for maybe 5 years, there will be a real vibrant, active live music scene. And then it sort of morphs into this like DJ world for 5 years or so. And then like the live music scene will come back. I've seen it happen a few times since I graduated. So around 96, the DJ scene was sort of starting to roll in and gigs were getting more difficult. And a couple of guys in the band were like, yeah, we're moving, we're breaking up the band and just go back. So, So I did the classic sort of post-college thing of like, I had this intention of moving to Nashville, but I was kind of broke and, you know, like, well, I'll move back and I'll move back to Charlotte and live with my parents for a little while, you know. That turned into like a couple of different things. Part of which is that, after I was here for about 6 or 7 months, Eddie Z, who owns the Playroom, he'd had the Playroom going for, I think 3 or 4 years, maybe at the time, in this little building down at the corner of 10th and Graham Street. The building's been torn down and some other stuff's been built, but it was catty corner from that Circle K. And he had just, finished doing a record with his own band where he'd hired Jim Brock to play drums and hand percussion. So he was looking for somebody that could join the band to go out and do live stuff and play drums and hand percussion. So Eddie walked into the old Reliable Music over on Stonewall Street,
Sure.
and asked those guys like, hey, like I need somebody to join my band that plays drums and hand percussion. And a bunch of the guys were like, oh, well, you know, Chris Garges just moved back to town. So Eddie called me and asked me to join his band. And I thought, well, this guy owns at the time, the Playroom was a small, rehearsal studio and a recording studio. And he was operating the recording studio pretty heavily at the time. So I thought, well, I'll join this guy's band and maybe that'll turn into some work as a session player.
Right.
You know? And we did the first rehearsal and, he kind of had an assistant engineer that sort of wasn't happening, you know? Mm-hmm. And there were a bunch of sort of bonehead moves during the rehearsal and maybe there was feedback or something like that. I can't remember. But at the end of the rehearsal, we're sort of packing up and Eddie's like, man, I need to find a good assistant engineer. Do you know any? And I kind of halfway lied to him and said, yeah, me. You know? And he was like, are you serious? What do you mean? I was like, well, like kind of, you know, and he's like, I tell you what, come back over here tomorrow at noon or whatever. And we'll talk about it. And so I went back the next day and, you know, he said, are you serious about this? And I said, well, yeah. I said, you know, I kind of know my way around. And he said, all right, start at the top of the console and tell me what every knob and button does, you know? And I could kind of do it. So he said, all right, cool. Like I'll show you around. I'll teach you some stuff. And, as soon as you can get up and running by yourself, I'll start paying you for your time here. And I said, great. So I made sure that like inside of a week that I was getting paid. And so I worked at the Playroom for a few years. And then when Mars Music opened, Eddie and I both got jobs there. I got a part-time job in the drum department and Eddie was actually the recording department manager. So he was away from the Playroom a whole lot more. So I wound up sort of managing the Playroom for a little while. And eventually quit the Mars job and just was working as a full-time engineer at the Playroom and still playing gigs. I mean, my entire life, I've still played gigs as a drummer, you know? So I did that for a while and it was a great learning experience and I built up a good client base and was able to bring in musicians that I knew and, you know, old friends, all this kind of stuff. And then Eddie decided that he was going to sort of close the studio down as a commercial venture and just make it kind of a private thing and do more of the rehearsal stuff. So he let me go and, instead of going and getting another job like a responsible person, I just went over to Studio East and like hung out every day.
Okay.
For like 3 months. And Joe Kuhlman, who owns the Evening Muse, was a staff engineer there at the time. And Mark Stallings, a wonderful keyboard player, was working there at the time. And I'd played gigs with Mark through high school and stuff. So those guys knew me and I hung out there and they kind of went to bat for me with the guy who owned the place and said, you know, this guy Chris, like he knows what he's doing engineering wise and he's a good drummer. And so they put me on staff there as a sort of staff drummer, hand percussionist and engineer. But also I had this client base. So I was able to bring bands in to Studio East. So they sort of saw me as valuable. So right. I worked there for about 2.5 years. And then left and became a freelance engineer.
So just to fast forward a little bit. So you've got this background, as a musician, drummer, percussionist, and you get on getting your way into the studio work. How did you get involved with Old House Studios? Because pretty much at this point in town, I would guess that's what you are mainly known for your work at Old House.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess my relationship with Old House sort of started around that same time. Like basically when I left Studio East, things were getting a little challenging at that job. The guy who owned it at the time was a little difficult.
Okay.
And there are a lot of people around town who would agree with me, so I don't have a problem saying that. He had a reputation for being difficult, and it was, and he was. But it was getting kind of to a point where it was difficult for me to book the studio with bands that were asking me to record them.
Right.
So I just sort of started booking stuff at some other studios around.
Okay.
And so that's kind of how my career as a freelancer started, So I was still working at Studio East, but I was also starting to record at some other studios. And that taught me a lot about, walking into a studio and figuring out the mixing console and the routing and the patch bay and all that kind of stuff. So I did that. I did that for a few years. And it was oddly enough, my sort of base of operations where I was doing most of my stuff around that time wound up being J. Howard Production Audio, which is where my high school band recorded.
Okay.
And as another little aside note, my very first recording session was at the original J. Howard Production Audio when it was on East Boulevard. When I was 8 years old, I did a voiceover for a Muppets radio commercial.
That's great.
So I had this, it's really weird how J. Howard Production Audio
Yeah.
weaved in and out of my life. But so anyway, so that was kind of my base of operations, but I was also doing stuff, I did some stuff at GAT3. I did some stuff at,
You doing the rounds in the studio scene in Charlotte, basically.
Yeah, I was. And Old House opened in 98 out in Gastonia.
Now there's an interesting story about Old House. Can you fill us in on the history of it? Cause Old House Studio has a really interesting past.
Yeah, it's pretty nuts. And I've got the studio history is on the website. There's a lot of history with the original building that's really fascinating to me. The building that Old House was in originally was a farmhouse that was built in 1873. And that's kind of where the name came from. But,
it's an old house.
It was a very old house. And I guess in around 96 or so, this guy named David Black, who lived in the house next door to the original studio. He'd married, this woman who the original Old House, it had been in their family the whole time.
Okay.
So, and he'd been a musician and stuff, and the house, the building was just sort of sitting vacant for 25 or 30 years or something like that. So he sort of thought, well, it'd be interesting to turn this place into a studio. So they got permission from the family, and they did 2 years worth of renovations to make sure the building was structurally sound, and then built this kind of nice, not super big, but a nice studio inside. And, so around the time that I was starting to do freelance stuff, he'd been in business for a few years, and there was a nice little article about them in Mix Magazine and stuff. And I thought, well, this place, the gear sounds great. And it sounds like kind of a neat place.
Had you heard about Old House while you were in Charlotte before, or no? Or?
Yeah, it seems like that was, again, they'd been in business for maybe 3 or 4 years, and word was sort of starting to get out about them.
Okay.
So there were, some bands going out there to record, and, I just sort of heard about them through some of the people in the recording community, and, Rob Preston, who's a really great electronics repair tech.
RFI, do I have
that?
Yep.
Yeah, that's Rob. Yeah, and he's been fixing my stuff for years, and Rob's terrific. And I think Rob had done some wiring and maybe fixed some stuff out there. And so he'd been out there and sort of told me that it was cool and everything, and that David was a nice guy. So in my, hunt for different studios to do different projects, I called David and said hey, I'm looking for some places to do some stuff, and your place looks cool. And so I went out there and met him and saw the studio, and it was pretty great. So, and David was super nice. So it got on my list of places, and so I did a few projects out there, and really liked it. Like I said, it was small, but it was really comfortable and really well equipped. He and I had a lot of similar tastes in equipment and things, and he was really great. And, so I was sort of floating around a bunch for a few years, and then unfortunately in early 2005, David passed away. And, so his wife and his business partner got in touch with me and asked me to sort of start to help finish up some stuff he was working on.
Right. And
then that turned into conversations about keeping the place open and all that. So I wound up running it for him for about 8 years.
Oh, wow.
Still out in Gastonia. And again, they owned it, but the chief engineer, and I was bringing in all the work and managing the studio. And
were you guys getting a lot of local artists, or was it folks from the region?
Yeah, I mean, I would say sort of regional. I mean, a lot of Charlotte bands. You know, it's a lot of people I knew. I mean, it's always, you know, most of my recording business has generally always been word of mouth. And again, as a drummer out sort of playing around, like I play a lot of jazz stuff. I'm very involved in the jazz community. I've known a lot of those folks since I was a kid, really. So I've always like recorded a lot of jazz.
Yeah.
Because everyone around here sort of knows me and I like that music and know kind of what it's supposed to sound like and everything.
So currently though, Old House is not in Gastonia anymore in the old house.
It's not.
You switched locations. Can you tell us what had occurred at that time?
Yeah, I guess it was like around 2000. Well, I guess it was like about 2010 or something like that. She'd remarried, and the guy she remarried was totally cool, but I think she was just sort of ready to move on with her life and not have a business in this building next door to her house and everything. So, I mean, not that there were any problems. I mean, everybody who was out there was always cool and, you know, but I think she was just ready to move on. But again, the studio had a great reputation and it was part of my livelihood. So like, what am I going to do? So we negotiated some stuff, and fortunately they were very patient with me for a couple of years. I got some money saved up. I borrowed some money. Ultimately in 2012, bought the business from them, and then sort of was working on getting a bank loan to do upfit in a new space, and had a space picked out sort of over in Plaza Midwood. Okay. In the meantime, I moved everything into a room over at the front of the playroom over on Tuckasegee. So again, Eddie Z comes back into play. Yeah. And fortunately, Eddie had this room, that was these two rooms that were available right up in front. And so I set up a little control room, moved the console from Old House, which is 10 feet long, into that room and set up a bunch of outboard gear and speakers and did a little bit of sort of makeshift acoustic treatment in there. And so I was sort of still floating around doing sessions. I did a bunch of stuff at Epiphonic up in Lenore, did a bunch of stuff at Fidelatorium, Mitch Easter's studio up in Kernersville, and was recording stuff in different places and then mixing at this little makeshift control room in the playroom, and was there for a few months and then got this bank loan together and then called the guy that had the building in Plaza Midwood, and he said, rent's going up around here. I think I'm going to like triple the rent on this space. Oh, goodness. So my business plan kind of went out the window and I had to find another space. And the sort of short version is that, I lucked into the space that I'm in now.
And it's a gorgeous space.
Thank you. I mean, it's really wonderful. The crazy thing about it is that I learned when you're looking for commercial space, real estate for a recording studio, don't tell the landlord that what you're doing is building a recording studio, because everybody thinks that it's all like
loud blasting music all the time.
Yeah, noise and drugs and problems and all this. And like, I mean, I've been in business for a long time. Like that's so not what's happening, you know.
Most people don't know though. The interesting thing is, if you are building a commercial studio, recording studio, there are a lot of specific things that you need to do at the studio. You can't just walk into a space and say, this is going to be my studio. There's a lot of specific things.
Well, you can do that, but if you want to do it properly, if you want to do it correctly, and if you want to do it correct, hopefully, if you want to do it correctly in a way that is going to make the place appealing for your clientele, right, and that you're going to have for a long time, hopefully, fingers crossed, then there are things that you need to do to make it appealing and make it sound good, and hopefully sort of make it where you're not bothering your neighbors, if you have neighbors, and that sort of thing.
But fortunately for you, I was amazed by this story. When you moved to the new space, what had happened? What did you find out?
When I talked to the landlord, he had two spaces that were available, and he said if you want and again, he didn't know what I was looking for, so he said the one up front has 8 offices built out into it, and the one in the unit back towards the back, like if you'll need to do some upfit because it was originally built as a recording studio, and like my jaw about dropped. But again, it's like that can mean anything, So, but as we talked a little bit, it turned out that I sort of knew a good bit about the guy who owned the studio, Doug Hawthorne, and Doug had built this place in like 96, and had run it for, I guess, maybe like 12 years or something like that.
Right.
Again, like it hadn't been a studio for a long time when I moved in. So we still had to do a ton of upfit, but the original shell of the studio was there, and he'd done all the right stuff. It's like he'd studied all these sort of BBC documents on acoustics and had built the rooms at these sort of ideal angles, and he had done the right number of layers of sheetrock and Celotex and insulation and all that, and steel studs, and no two rooms touch each other really, and all that kind of stuff. So,
how long have you been in the current location?
A little more than 8 years. Yeah,
8 years.
Yeah, we did the first session in May of 2013 with this band, the Turnstiles.
At the new location, who are some of the local artists who you work with who've rolled through the doors?
Man, there've been so many great ones. I've done a handful of records with the Mike Strauss band over the years. Mm-hmm. I mean, like at both at the old studio location, and I've done a couple records at the new location, and they're one of my favorite bands around. They're totally great. And I've done stuff for the Alternative Champs. And I've done stuff for Leisure McCorkle and Jolene.
Who's been in recently?
That band Akita. Yeah, they were just in. And Patrick was on your show.
Those guys are awesome.
Yeah, they're terrific. And
if you haven't seen them live, if you're listening, go see Akita.
Yeah, I saw them at the Whitewater Center a little while back, and they were just fantastic.
Yeah, these guys are full of energy.
Yeah, and they've got a new singer, Ade Herbert, who I think was also on your show.
Ade was on. Yeah, he was with the Hawthorns.
Yeah, back then. Yeah, but he's singing with them now, and it's great. Yeah, they're developing their thing, and it's really awesome.
There aren't that many studios left in Charlotte. I mean, I know you at Old House. I know GAT3 because I was there doing a session with Keno Watson a while back. Mm-hmm. Who else is still running full-fledged studios?
Well, there are a bunch of places. I mean, a lot of them are in people's houses and things, but there are some commercial facilities like Audio Works. Mark Lambert's place, which is also where Scott Slagle is running Asylum now. And they've both been in business a long time. Grindhouse. Which just opened.
Yeah. Cause I'm just thinking, the advent of the internet and, home recording has probably, had to put a dent in the studio, in the large studio recording or big commercial spaces?
Well, yeah, I would say so. I mean, there are a lot of guys that are doing full-time commercial recording in nice studios they have in their house. I mean, like Boo English is a perfect example of that,
Not Hole Studio.
Not Hole. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Rob Taglione, who has Catalyst, that's in his house also. Mm-hmm. But those guys have been in business for a really long time, and they have sort of nice places that just happen to be in their homes,
Right. What's some of the things that you would think are more beneficial coming to a studio as opposed to somebody like myself doing everything at home, do that DIY? What are some of the benefits that somebody would get?
Well, I mean, a lot of the reasons why people come to me, for example, are that I've got a setup where it's really easy to record an entire band at the same time. And like, I like doing a lot of that. And a lot of my clientele are the sort of bands where that kind of thing it just fits the aesthetic of the band,
I'd imagine there's a great deal of expertise though that goes into it. Cause I might know how to mic an amplifier, but you might have a better mic and you might have a better miking technique than I do to get that sound.
Sure, but that's not exclusive to a commercial facility. I mean, like, right. Given time and trying to learn some things, anybody can learn that stuff at home, and you can spend as much money as you want on a microphone. So,
well, as I've talked to other people about just recording in general. So you're a DIY musician, and then being a DIY musician, you're not only tasked with your music, writing your music, you're also tasked with the recording of it. And you're not only tasked with the recording of it, you're tasked with the publication of it.
Yeah.
And then you're tasked with the internet. And, I think sometimes one thing about going to a commercial studio that's beautiful is that I don't have to worry about all that. I go in and play. And all I have to do is worry about being an artist and a musician.
Right. That's another thing that a lot, like I hear a lot of my clients, come to me and say, "Oh, well, I got a recording setup going, but it's really frustrating. And by the time I finally get the computer working and get things hooked up and plugged in and turned on and all that, I'm frustrated, or the inspiration's gone, and I'm not. It's hard to get a good take. I can't just relax and do it. So, a lot of people wind up coming to me for that reason because they don't have to think about it.
walking the line? Are you an engineer and a producer, or do they do the groups that come into you, are they bringing their own producer, or do they ask you to do both? How does that work? It's
kind of all over the map. Like I don't ever sort of generally assume the role of producer. Uh-huh. Although, I mean, at some point in a recording session, there's some things that sort of cross the line. I mean, somebody asks an opinion and you give them an opinion, or you might have an idea. And if you worked with the band for enough hours to think they're going to be amenable to a suggestion, then I might make a suggestion, you know?
Yeah.
But if, for example, if a band comes in and they know exactly what they want and they're on a tight budget, you know, like I'm not going to, you know, string them along with any, like,
right.
No, that take wasn't good enough. You need to keep doing it. You know, I mean, like, again, if they ask, you know, I'll make a suggestion like, we should do that again. You know, maybe check the tuning on the guitar or something like that, you know? But if a band has talked to me about producing something, you know, and, or if I've worked with the band like a lot, then I'm a little more likely to sort of make suggestions based on what I know about the people involved and what the project is like or whatever. In a lot of cases, I work with bands that do bring in an outside producer and I'm just engineering. And, I kind of love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Real rarely. I mean, maybe on a couple of occasions. There was one, like, sort of big time guy where things got a little weird. But it was all cool ultimately. But there are a couple of local people that I've worked with that are really, really great. Like I've done a bunch of projects with Dan Hood producing.
Okay.
And like, in addition to being like just a really fantastic guitar player, he's a really great guy and a good producer. And he's a good communicator. Mm-hmm. And so he and I sort of came up developing our careers together, playing, like we've played a lot of music together and we've recorded together a bunch. And, he's good about sort of explaining what he wants sonically, and he knows kind of what I'm good at. And so we work really well together, and but he's also really good at like getting a singer to pay attention to the lyrics that they're singing and all this kind of stuff without freaking anybody out or being like a jerk about it. Like he's really good about that stuff. So like he's one of the producers I really like working with.
That's awesome. So what do you have coming up?
Man, things are super busy right now, which is great. Yeah. I'll take
all these musicians been cooped up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's kind of funny. It was like, you know, I did all this kind of weird stuff last year where I was mixing a lot from home and doing remote drumming. And then kind of in the fall, I started cautiously having people back in and, you know, but then it was like January 2nd or something like that. It's just like phone calls and texts and emails just were coming in like crazy. And, so it's been really, really busy this year and hopefully it'll keep up.
Do you have any projects that that have been, are you currently doing, or things that are coming out that you're really excited about?
Yeah, man, there's one that's like really, well, there are a lot that are really awesome, but there's one in particular that I'm really excited about, that, I think is coming out October 1st.
Okay.
And the band is called the Facto Brothers.
Okay.
And it's a few guys that used to be in this band called the Luxuriant Sedans that were from Winston-Salem. And the Luxuriant Sedans, I did several projects for them, and that band split up. And then these guys had this idea to do, originally it was just going to be like this sort of 10-song thing with sort of a core band that was them with me playing drums. And then some singers that they knew recording some cover songs. And then they were going to put all the money from the release towards some organizations that benefit, musicians with substance abuse problems.
Wow. That's wonderful.
Yeah. And then while we were working on this thing, it just sort of morphed into this bigger and bigger project. And, we wound up sort of getting some kind of, you know, star singers from around North Carolina to be involved. I think the first sort of person of note that we got involved with was Don Dixon.
Wow.
He sang on a couple things for us. Peter Holsapple wound up playing some keyboards and singing on some stuff. Mitch Easter played some guitar. And then it just got to be this big thing. Danielle Howell is singing on it. John Howie Jr., Caitlin Carey, Bruce Hazel, Justin Faircloth, Jeffrey Dean Foster. And then the core band was, Ed Bumgarner playing bass, Rob Slater and Gino Grandinetti playing guitar. Doug Davis played keys on most of the record. And I played drums on most of it. Larry Carmen played drums on some of it. DK, David Kim played drums on one song. It's amazing. Again, Kenny Soul, the drummer from Nantucket, he's up in New York. He sent us, we did a version of Frankenstein and he and I did the double drumming thing on it.
Oh, that's great.
My friend Jay Reynolds, who's in Raleigh now, he was the woodwind player for Sleep at the Wheel.
Mm-hmm.
He did the horn stuff on Frankenstein. We sent a song to Billy Livesey, who's a big time keyboard player in Nashville, who used to play with Ronnie Lane, and we did a Ronnie Lane song, so we got Billy to play keys on it, and Bill Lloyd sang on it, and it wound up sort of morphing into this thing too, where they recorded a bunch of songs by North Carolina artists.
Oh wow!
So there's a Temperance League song on it, there's a Houston Brothers song on it, there's a Sunshine Still song on it, there's a Peter Holsapple song on it, and there's an unreleased Mitch Easter song. So I've been playing drums in his band for 14 years, and we've occasionally played some songs that he's never released. So there was one in particular I thought would be good for this project. So I emailed Mitch and said, hey, would it be okay if we were, so, and he was all about it. He was like, yeah, this is great. So we recorded that and then got Bill Lloyd, who was in Foster and Lloyd, and Bill's sort of a big guy in the power pop scene, and a huge Let's Active fan. And I've known Bill for a while. So we asked him to sing on it, and he did. It was great. And so, there are all these wonderful people involved. A lot of Charlotte musicians involved in this.
That's always good to hear.
Yeah. Tim Gordon and Brad Wilcox, who are part of the horn section du jour around here. They play a lot with the Temptations and Four Tops. Mm-hmm. They did a lot of the horn stuff on it. Greg Gerald played saxophone on some of it. Ron Brendel wrote an amazing string arrangement for this version of this Ben Folds song that we did that John Elderkin sang. And Ron's wife, Jane, and her quartet played on it. Yeah, it's just like tons of great people. And listen, they've, Ed and Rob wound up putting together, a nonprofit organization called Abundance NC. And the name of the album is called Be Good to Yourself. So that's kind of the theme of this project, but they got a bunch of, relationships set up with various treatment centers around North Carolina. So all the money from this is going to, set up programs with these treatment centers to help musicians. And one thing the musicians are kind of known for, and musicians in Charlotte are great about this, is like when there's a cause, when there's a benefit, kind of thing for something, like everyone around here is quick to sort of jump on the bandwagon and be like, what can I do to help? Like if there's a benefit show, everybody wants to play these benefit shows. And, and I've seen a lot of people raise a lot of money for a lot of really good causes around here. So what's interesting about this is that all these people sort of stepped up to the plate to contribute to it. But this album, it's like directly, going to benefit musicians who need help. And this last year, man, with everybody being cooped up, there have been a lot of suicides, a lot of addiction problems have sort of reared their heads, and
a lot of people who need help.
Yep, absolutely.
Can you send me a link to that? I could put it in the show notes, and then if people are listening to the episode and they want to help out, they can go to that webpage and find out how they can help donate and do what they need to do. Yeah, absolutely. That's like fantastic. I said, that just by buying the album, it's going to be a 23 song double CD. Oh, fantastic. And then 10 of those songs will be on a vinyl release too, available. So it's a great cause, and the record's pretty great too, if I say so myself. So Chris, as we start to wrap things up, if we want to get in touch with you at Old House, how do we do that? How do we find out about Old House? Where are you? Yeah, there's a website, www.oldhousestudio.com. Just all one word, Old House Studio. And then, we're on Facebook under the same handle, and Instagram as well. And there are a ton of pictures. The website's still a little in flux, Michael Slaughter helped build it and did a great job with it. But, I'm still being nitpicky and about some things. There's some things we need to get updated, but there are a ton of pictures of different sessions we've done, on the Facebook page. We have a YouTube channel too, and there are a bunch of little short videos of various sessions up there. I need to sort of update that and get some more things. I have a personal website too that's just chrisgarges.com, but I haven't updated that in a really, an embarrassingly long time. Well, now there's your call to action. You just tagged yourself. There you go. But my phone number's on, the studio phone number is on both those sites. And text or email, you can email. We'll put links in the show notes over to your Instagram and the webpage and all that kind of stuff. Awesome. So you're good. Yeah. All right. Well, Chris, thanks for coming out today, man. Good to see you in person. Yeah, thanks. I'm so glad you got me on. It's a great podcast, man. I love it. You've got so many of my friends on it and stuff, and I really enjoy listening to the interviews. Man, I appreciate it. Yeah. All right, man. Have an awesome day. Thanks. You too. And that will bring episode 47 of the Queen City Music Podcast to a close. If you have an idea for an episode or would like to be a guest on the QCMP, reach out to me at qcmusicpodcast@gmail.com. Also, check out our local partners, Records on the Wall at rexonthewall.com, Reporting from 20XX at reportingfrom20xx.wordpress.com, and Queen City Live at instagram.com/Queen City Live Music. Until next month, be well and stay safe.